My name is Lindsay. I'm a senior studying marketing here at the David Eccles School of Business. I'm excited for this opportunity to be involved in today's Sales Innovation Summit and to introduce our speaker, Catt. Catt is a senior account executive with Skilljar, a rapidly growing tech company. His main role is to help the company grow by bringing in new customers. His main focus is developing strong relationships to help demonstrate why working with Skilljar and Dale personally is the right choice. Please join me in welcoming Catt.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the warm welcome here. As mentioned, my name is Dale. I'm here to talk about building trust and influencing decisions. This is a very important topic for my day-to-day role as a salesperson. I feel like I'm going to be able to give you a unique glimpse into the day-to-day life of a salesperson. I know most of the speakers here today are going to be vice presidents, chief executive officers, so hoping to share a little bit of my experience and, like I said, give you a little bit of perspective on what it's like for being a boots on the ground individual right now. So before we get too far into it, I want to give you an idea of what you're in for our conversation here. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and maybe why I'm relevant for this conversation today. Then I want to work on setting the stage. Building trust and influencing decisions is difficult. So I want to outline kind of the challenges and what you're up against as a salesperson should you decide to go that direction after you graduate. Then I'm going to spend a majority of my time talking about building trust, kind of my game plan, my approach, if you will, and my perspective around how to do that. And time permitting, we'll do some questions and answers here at the end. So let's get on into it. Who am I on my own time? So in this picture here, you can see me and my beautiful wife. This is us at Big Elk Lake up in the high Uintas. We're very much outdoors enthusiasts. We like to hike, climb, paddleboard, you name it. We also have two wonderful dogs, an 8-year-old golden retriever and a 3-month-old golden retriever who is an absolute menace right now. She's probably destroying my living room while we're both gone. I'm also an avid reader. I don't like reading anything nonfiction. If it has action, it's made up, I'm all about it. I'm on book 6 of Red Rising right now. If you know, you know. It's fantastic, highly recommend it. But maybe a little bit more relevant to this conversation is my professional life, and I guess why I'm here in front of you today. So I'm what I'd consider a sales veteran. I've been an individual contributor for the last decade since I graduated from the University of Utah. In that time, I have been a cold caller, making 100 cold calls a day to set meetings for others. I've also done pretty much every role in between as I've moved my way up the ranks to becoming a senior account executive, which really just means I negotiate larger deals, bigger contracts, and so they give me a little bit more flexibility and discretion once you start to move up the chain. I've also been a top performer at 3 different organizations. In that time, I've sold tens of millions of dollars in revenue, and I've earned a whole lot of sales awards. These things are super fun to have people pat you on the back, but I think the most enjoyable is President's Clubs. And for those of you who haven't sold or worked in the corporate space, I figured I'd tell you a little bit about what that is. And so President's Club is usually the top 5 to 10% of individuals at an organization on the sales side of the business get an all expenses paid vacation to somewhere tropical in the middle of the Utah winter. And so I've been able to do this 8 times. It's really enjoyable. I have been able to take my wife, been all over the Caribbean and Mexico. Really a fun reward for a hard job well done. So I've also been a sales team leader, a coach, and a mentor on a daily basis to several members I've worked with throughout my sales career. So enough about me. I guess I'll put one other relevant plug in here. I graduated from the University of Utah with a degree in finance. I did not intend to be a salesperson. I actually was an accountant for a few years. So most of the advice I'm going to share today is really around the perspective that I hope once you leave this room, if you don't already have a job in sales, it gives you an idea of an approach or maybe a philosophy of how you can go out, maybe have a step ahead of the rest and give you a step in the right direction for being able to represent yourself and build trust with the individuals. So I mentioned setting the stage. Ultimately, I wanted to kind of give you an idea of my perspective around purchasing and behaviors of customers to help you understand, I guess, the philosophy I'm going to share through the rest of this conversation. And that is building trust and influencing decisions is hard. I think a majority of people think about sales in terms of winning against your competitor, making sure people buy your product. But from what I've found is that people are afraid to make decisions. There's a theory out there around loss aversion. It was done in the 1990s. It's been done several times between now and then. But really the idea is that as humans, we are more likely to avoid loss than we are to seek gain. And we apply that to making a purchasing decision. It exacerbates that even further, because as humans, we're afraid to make the wrong decision as opposed to focusing on making the best decision for our lives. It gets even harder in the corporate space, where in our lives, if we make the wrong decision, we can return a product. We can maybe try again the next day. In the corporate space, if you make the wrong decision, it can negatively impact your business immensely. It can hurt the people in your day-to-day life. It could impact your career trajectory. Honestly, you could get fired if you make the wrong purchasing decision. So the tough part is, as human beings, it's hard for us to make a decision, but it gets even more difficult the higher up you go and the more expensive your purchases and sales. So what do people typically do to try and overcome these? And what I've found is that they're seeking a few elements of trust that help them overcome that fear. The first is they want to build the trust of their peers. They want to share that purchasing burden with people on their teams. So what does that look like? Typically, that's trying to get other stakeholders at their business to buy in on the ideas and be able to build trust with them. Additionally, they try and find expert advice. This can be very difficult. Usually, expert advice comes at the cost of a Deloitte or an Accenture strategist to come in and help your business. It's rare that you can find somebody who can tell you everything you want to about a purchasing decision. But ultimately, what they're looking for is a trustworthy partner to help them be able to overcome that fear of making the wrong decision. So what I'm curious about, oh, wrong one, is who you all think is trustworthy. So we're going to do a quick little exercise here. I'm curious, by show of hands, who here believes doctors are trustworthy? All right, honestly, this is going to be pretty good for our stats. So about 50%. I would imagine this would be higher, but I didn't make up the study. HubSpot did. So doctors are experts, and they have kind of the same outcome that you're looking for. They're trying to make you healthy. They should be trustworthy. What about lawyers? A little bit of a different scenario. Let's put our hands up. Who thinks lawyers are trustworthy? Very few. Okay. Well, these people are experts, but they don't necessarily have the same outcomes in mind that you do. So this study shows them about 12%. What about baristas? So we all know that baristas can't necessarily get our orders right. Sometimes they get our names right. How many of you believe baristas are trustworthy? A few. Well, in this particular study, it's 5%. So let's get to the crux of my argument here. So what about salespeople? I imagine this might be skewed, but raise your hand if you believe salespeople are trustworthy. Not very many. And that's the answer we're looking for. And ultimately, like, the numbers themselves don't really matter. It's really the story that this tells. In this particular study, the only thing worse is politicians and stockbrokers. So here's our problem. We ultimately have a large group of buyers who are afraid to make a decision. They need some trustworthy assets to help them overcome the fear of making that decision. And who do they trust? By definition, not us. So what are we supposed to do with that information? Well, what I'm going to share with you today is what I like to do, and that's to become something different entirely. I don't like to represent myself as a salesperson because I don't view myself as a salesperson. What I like to do is become an advisor, showcase to my customers, my buyers, that I'm focused on solving their unique problems, not selling my product. When I do this correctly, I'm able to influence the decision and be able to showcase to them that I'm really focused on their goals and their outcomes. And it gives me that first layer of trust with one individual at an organization. But like I mentioned, we need more than one cook in the kitchen if we want to be able to help our buyers overcome the fear of making that decision. So as a coach, it's my job to help them sell internally, build stakeholders, so that way they can have the confidence that they need to overcome that fear of making a decision. And lastly, I become a teammate. I work really hard to make sure that I'm aligned with their objectives, their strategy, and really am embedded in every opportunity by going above and beyond whatever they expect a salesperson to be, to make sure that I'm an important element of their success, and they can't do anything but choose to work with me. So let's talk about being an advisor. You'll see here it says that advisors don't sell products, they solve problems, and that's very true. I'm sure if you've heard some of the conversations today, everybody likes to talk about how salespeople are cringy. They are really focused on selling their product. They're focused on their commission check. You can feel it whenever you're in a conversation with a salesperson. And that's why I recommend don't represent yourself as one. Represent yourself as an advisor. So how do we do this? Advisors are typically people who are experienced. They've solved similar problems in the past. They're typically third parties, and they're product agnostic, meaning that they don't particularly care which solution, which product, which vendor is chosen for the solution. They're really focused on solving that problem. And so I want to make sure whenever I show up to my first meeting with somebody that I'm able to highlight that I'm an advisor. So to do that, I want to understand their business better than anybody else. I want to be able to show up and understand how they make money, what's important to them as a company. I want to be able to be highly relevant. I want to be able to showcase that I have experience solving similar problems, that I'm focused on solving their unique problem, and that I'm product agnostic. At the end of the day, we want to be able to tell people that our product is the best, but it isn't always the best. And being able to be honest about that is something that is truly different between advisors and salespeople. So, to give you an idea of what I typically do going into my first conversation to set myself up as an advisor, is I want to understand their go-to-market strategy. This isn't understanding their brand, it's understanding what activities they need their customers to complete in order for them to generate revenue and be successful. Some organizations are going to be focused on like a point sale. Most of those companies are going to be focused on marketing to drive people to buy their product. Whereas companies who are focused on subscription are focused on deriving consistent value for their customers. Think of a Netflix. That's why they come out with new content all the time. They're focused on making sure that you're seeing consistent value with their business. Some companies are focused on usage. They'll give you their products for free, but they only make money as soon as you start to use them. Think of half the apps on your phone, credit cards, lines of credit from the bank. Ultimately, understanding how a company makes money will tell you a lot about what they care about as a company, where they're going to invest resources, their time, their people, their energy. So to do this, I'm typically using a few different sources. I go to their website and digest anything and everything I can, what their ownership cares about, what their products are, what industry verticals they sell to. Honestly, I use ChatGPT for this a lot if I'm at all confused, because there are some companies out there you'll find that don't have a particularly linear idea of showcasing how they make money to companies. So these are some of the first seeds that I start to put together of understanding what matters to them as a business. Next, I really want to understand how to be highly relevant. In order to do that, I need to understand what matters, what matters to the business at that current point in time, and what matters to my prospect, the individual I'm going to be talking to. In order to be relevant about the company and their trajectory, I need to understand what's happening in the industry, what's happening to their business. Are they hiring? Did they just have a big layoff? Did they just get acquired? Did they add new products? These are all things that help come into that idea of being able to showcase that I understand their business. Same thing with the buyer themselves. Did they just get a new role? How long have they been there? What is their role? Typically, I'm using their financial reports, LinkedIn, Zoom info. There's a wealth of freemium, free, and paid different options to be able to capture this type of information. But really what I'm looking for is context and relevancy to be able to combine this and marry this data with what I have as a company. So when you go out in the world and you work for an organization, they're inevitably going to have case studies. They're going to have customer research. They're going to have all sorts of stories about how they've helped individual companies and the outcomes that they've had. It'll be part of your sales enablement whenever you go through that process. And so my recommendation, and what I typically do, is I take the information I've learned about their business and I try and apply it to how we've helped other customers in the past. Similar go-to-market strategy, similar title to them, similar economic situation to their business. So that way I can be highly relevant in my conversation. It sounds something like this. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, it sounds to me like your business is highly focused on making sure that your customers can use your product immediately after they download it. I also noticed that your company has cut 10% of your jobs in your development and operation side of your business. Typically, when I work with other companies in that space, they're highly focused on making sure that they can help their customers onboard immediately without needing customer support to do so. Does that sound similar to any challenges you're looking to solve today? And now the idea here isn't to be correct. It's not to tell them, I know your business exactly, but it's to focus on starting to solve a problem, not talking about my product. There will inevitably be a time to talk about your product, but that is whenever you're able to actually understand that they have a problem we're solving, one that your business has strengths at helping solve. That way you can make it highly relevant to why you're talking about your product in general. This is the first seed that I try and set on a conversation to be able to showcase to customers that I'm different. I'm an advisor. I'm focused on solving their problems. In telling that story, I've shown them that I know their business. I've shown them that I've solved problems in the past. I'm focused on solving their problems, and that I'm agnostic about which product they choose to purchase. So this is really the basis, and I'm painting with some broad strokes here. Ultimately, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of topics and discussions you're going to have around discovery before you go and join into the sales world here, but this is the philosophy that I have of representing yourself the first time whenever you meet buyers. But This is just the first step for me. Thank you for the water. So I mentioned earlier that although we can give people the confidence to be able to buy a product, they're ultimately not going to have the confidence to do so unless they have the support of their peers. It's a scary world out there. Thank you. So ultimately, it's our job as a coach to be able to help our buyers build confidence in their ability to buy, their abilities to sell internally, and to help them get the access to their peers so that way they can join the fold and we can both expand our sphere of trust. So I'll tell you a quick story about why being an advisor is not just enough. That'll kind of illustrate this. So I was working for a company I imagine many of you are familiar with, Qualtrics. They're a large local company. I had the opportunity to sell to a company similar to BetterHelp, a large telehealth organization. I set myself up as an advisor. I did a great job of helping solve a problem, and they had a great problem worth solving. Ultimately, they had a big problem where they were spending a lot of money to get people in the door. They would have their first visit with a psychiatrist and never come back. It was expensive for marketing. It was a huge headache for their operations team, consistently having to onboard brand new insurance for their clients. So in the process, I identified that my buyer had the budget, she could make the decision, and I'd done a great job of building trust and helping try and understand how to solve their problem. So we put a presentation together to showcase to our team what we were going to do. We went into this conversation. We had members from their technology team, their marketing team, and their operations team. And we get about 15 minutes into the call, and their chief technology officer raises his hand and says, "Hey, Dale, I have a question for you." I guess more of a statement. I appreciate that you put a lot of time and effort into this, but we haven't really aligned on this being the particular solution for our company. I could be wrong, but does anybody else here want to vouch that this is the direction we want to go? And so it got real awkward real quick. Nobody said anything. About 50 seconds, a minute in, my champion kind of pipes up and says, "Hey, I have the budget. This is my initiative. I can make this decision. I just wanted to let you know this is the direction we were going to go." Ultimately, the call kind of devolved a little bit. We decided to call it early so they could have some internal discussions and figure out what next steps were. I was still hopeful, but 1 month, 2 months, 5 months went by, and I never won this deal, even though I believed I was at the right place. But what I learned after the fact and talking with my champion, who I'm actually still pretty good friends with, is that we alienated her from her team. We both became salespeople. We came in and we weren't trying to help them solve their unique problems. We were telling them the solution. So she lost credibility. I immediately was pegged as a salesperson who didn't understand or care about their each individual needs, and I lost as a result of that. And so really the idea here is you can build trust with one part of the business, but you need multiple touch points. You need to be able to expand that across the organization. And so what I do going forward, and what I've been doing the last several years after having this experience, is making sure that I get my buyers one-on-one. I need to understand their weaknesses in purchasing. I need to understand whether they've bought before in the past. If they had, who did they go through? Who gave them the confidence to make a decision? If they haven't, let's do some stakeholder mapping. Who on your team would help give you confidence? Who are your peers? Who are the mentors on your team who would help give you confidence? Who are the naysayers, the people who are going to tell you that you shouldn't do it? Let's get those people into the conversation, and let's be advisors to them and help understand the problems that they're trying to solve and be as relevant as we can to their business, as opposed to telling them the solution that we're trying to put forward. Ultimately, the idea here is to help your customers understand who they need to buy, then teach them how to be advisors and how to tailor that messaging to those individual groups, and ultimately be able to get them onto conversations with us, so that way they can build credibility in the solution, and I can build trust with those individuals. Ultimately, the idea here is to, like I said, expand my sphere of trust to a broader portion of the organization and give my buyers the confidence they need in order to actually make the right decision. So let's talk about being a teammate. This one is a little bit less tactical in nature, and this is something that I find might be my superpower, but it's also something that I think anybody can exude. For those of you who were in Sydney's conversation last time about being unequivocally yourself, I think this is something about just putting the extra effort in to be able to showcase to customers that you're willing to go above and beyond and make sure that you unblock any roadblock they have in the line of their success. So whereas a coach, we're focused on understanding our gaps, teaching to the weaknesses of our buyers. As a teammate, it's our job to plug any holes or help them in any way we can, because inevitably these folks aren't going to be professional purchasers. They're not going to be salespeople. They might not even be type A people who enjoy talking to others. And so it's going to be your job to find any areas where they fall short, to help them understand that it's okay for them to give that burden to you and allow you to help them. In some cases, this ends up being me writing ghost emails for my clients. Sometimes this is making cold phone calls to bring some of their peers onto conversations, building business case studies to help showcase the value for their business because they don't have the expertise to do it. Sometimes this even means cutting my sales price shorter or cutting the contract timing shorter, really just showcasing to my customer that I'm focused on helping them accomplish their common goal and I'm willing to get in the trenches and help them get there myself. Whenever you do this, you're really showcasing to your customers that you're an integral part of their team, and done correctly, you are what gives them the confidence to make that decision, and without you, they don't have the confidence to make a decision with anybody except for you and your business. So, kind of in closing here, talking about influence, ultimately the idea that I'm putting forward is to become the trusted advisor for your customers, showcase to them that you're focused on solving their problem, and build that first seed of trust. Next, you need to understand how important it is to build trust across the broader section of the organization and be able to teach your buyers how to get the buy-in from the rest of their teams. Whenever you do so, in conjunction with connecting yourself to their success and being bought in on helping them accomplish and unblock any goals or any obstacles that they have, you can really allow yourself to become embedded in their success, and it turns the conversation less from, would you buy my product, to when do we get started? So ultimately, that is my philosophy. I have one caveat here, and I think really the idea that I put together today is what I've learned about myself over the last decade of selling and what I have found to be my direction for how to be successful. And I think the philosophy that I wanted to point out to everybody is this is going to be different roles for each of you, but the idea is to find roles that fit in with who you are, be able to showcase to customers that you're focused on their outcomes and their goals and helping them be successful. So I challenge you to find roles that fit into your life that allow you to separate yourself and showcase to your customers that you're true partners. So I'll stop here. Do we have any questions out there?
One, thank you for your time. And as far as, well, I'll use your phrases. So if you're going to rep a product or a company, generally, if you actually support it, if you believe in it, it's a little bit easier to rep it and to be an advisor to somebody.
Yeah.
But as you went from Qualtrics to SkillJar or whatever it was in between, how did you kind of make that decision going into a company without really knowing the inside baseball or kind of what's under the hood prior to?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. And I think for me, I've made a lot of career decisions based off of leadership and people that I want to be like. So I worked at a company called England Logistics before I went to Qualtrics. The person I ended up working for, his name is Ryan Driscoll. He's an amazing leader. I went to work for him because I saw traits in him that I wanted to copy. And it was very similar whenever I went to SkillJar. My boss, Mike Walden over there, there were a lot of traits that I wanted to copy from him. And so I focused a lot of my career on who I wanted to be, not necessarily the company I wanted to work for. That might not necessarily be the best strategy, but I've learned through the years that I really like to try and steal the best traits of the people around me. And ultimately, that's what made my decision to change from one company to the other. It wasn't necessarily the product. And you're very right, that can really determine the trajectory of your sales career and choosing the right company to work for. But I've made a habit of choosing people to work for more often than not.
This question's kind of connected, and so it might be a good question or not, but if you're building sales teams out, how do you distinguish those traits in the interview process? How do you know if the sales guy's going to be good as you're trying to build out a sales team and things like that? Well,
fortunately, I get some reverb. I haven't built out a sales team myself. I've typically been appointed the leader of sales teams, but a majority of what I would look for is somebody who's focused on problem solving. I mean, I mentioned it in that advisor section, and I could filibuster an entire hour about being an advisor, but really it's being able to separate yourself from the sale. And I feel like that's the most difficult thing that most salespeople have is they start seeing the dollar signs, they start focusing on the end result, and they start focusing on conversions instead of conversations. And I think problem solving and I guess being able to detach from the end sale would be the two main qualities that I would look for in somebody. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there are, so you talked about like finding managers who have like traits that you want to emulate. Do you think that there are things that maybe certain sales managers or organizations do that sort of incentivize their reps to maybe not be a trusted advisor, to only see dollar signs? Like, in other words, do you think that maybe management has a role here in guiding salespeople?
I definitely think so, and I think there's a lot of organizations I feel like want you to follow a specific playbook. Depending on the organization you work for, I mean, at Qualtrics we did command of the message, so there's a particular set of items you're supposed to accomplish during a particular sales call. For the company I work for now, it's called value selling. Some companies it's med pick. There's tons of different like selling techniques, and so depending on the technique your company adopts, it can kind of push you one direction or another. But I do think as sales managers, we're usually focused on trying to coach to the mean. We want everybody to do something similar, and your best reps can kind of get wild and do whatever they want. But I think the point is to be able to follow a system and something that you can be habitual about, but then also put your own spin on it. I don't know how many of you were here when Sydney was talking, but being yourself and really putting yourself on display. I mean, the amount of times I've had people tell me that they purchased a product because of me is probably 75% or higher. And so I would just challenge you, if you have a boss or somebody telling you to do that, do as best as you can to follow that, but also be yourself and get creative. Because the reason I've received a bunch of these cool awards is because I failed a ton. I learned from the best, but I also made a ton of mistakes and tried to learn through the process. And so, I mean, you can try and follow a system as much as you want, but I mean, it's kind of up to you as a salesperson. I think that's the fun part about being an individual contributor is you don't really have a whole lot of ways that they can measure you besides being successful. So, yeah, in the back over here, he's been raising his hand for a few.
I was just gonna ask, like, what are some of the sales trainers that you've taken courses from, and then also if we could see a role play, I think that'd be cool.
Sure. Some of the sales trainers, I mean, ultimately, throughout the years, I've read, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a big fiction reader. I've read a lot of nonfiction in their sales books. I find them stuffy and difficult to spend time on. So I think, I would say, I mean, if you're looking for some fun ones, the Sandler training rules, I think, are really good ones to get started on. They're all like bite-sized clips, like don't spill your candy in the lobby. They have like silly names, but they're really good ideas. What I mentioned earlier about telling a story, that's a Sandler tip. It's tell a story to show that you have experience. But honestly, there's 1,000 resources out there. They're just packaged and bottled and put into different setups. I mean, the Challenger sales is a really good one as well. But I think the best way to do it is find mentors who you believe can make you better salespeople, because books are going to tell you a bunch of different philosophy. I made up a book today about how I approach conversations. Everybody's going to have their different philosophy, so it's about putting your own spin on it. And I'm not opposed to doing a role play, but how much time do we have?
We got about 3 more minutes.
Okay. Well, how do you want to play it?
You can just pitch your products.
Oh, pitch my product?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I work for a company called SkillJar. We're highly focused on helping organizations better educate their customers. Primarily, customer education these days is done with buy my product and figure it out, or here's a web article or a webinar. But for most businesses that you aren't really able to drive value, understand what that customer education journey looks like, so it makes it hard to impact a lot of what your customers care about. I mentioned earlier that some companies are focused on subscription. You need to drive consistent value. That means you need to add products pretty regularly, but you also need to educate your customers so that way they're using them. Because if I add a new product and nobody uses it, it's not actually adding value. I also need to be able to understand who's engaging with it, where they're falling off, where they're struggling in that journey, so I can improve it. If we're talking about companies who are focused on onboarding, you heard me use that as an example. A lot of times companies these days, I mean, these are all relevant examples. When I mentioned about losing headcount, there's a lot of reductions in workforce going on in support sides of business, and having tech touch is what they like to call it these days, or self-service ways to onboard your customers, give them an opportunity to train on demand and be experts in your product is extremely important. It's also important to make sure that your partners and the people who help resell your product or help implement your product have the up-to-date knowledge to be able to sell effectively for you. And so a lot of what my role is focused on is talking to individuals who are focused on driving some kind of outcome with their customers. And so I mentioned like problem solving. Whenever I go into a conversation, it's really, I've done some research about your business, what matters to you individually, because it's going to matter different for the first person you talk to than their boss and their boss's boss. And so being able to understand, I can make your day-to-day life easier, but I can make your boss's life easier by helping them connect the data so they can report it up internally. So there's a wealth of different ways that you can tailor a conversation to what my product does. But really, I'm a mirror for who I'm talking to, and it's understanding what matters to them, because a majority of the time education can impact pretty much every business. So I'll pause there. Any other questions? Are we done on time? Okay, wrap it up. Well, if any of you would like to, feel free to ask me questions on LinkedIn. You can find me, Dale, Catt. I don't know what my handle is there, but feel free to ask any questions. Yeah, thank you for your time.